I'm Mr. Surface, and welcome to Mr. Surface's Book Club. We're going to look at 3 titles briefly today, and I can't wait for your feedback. And if you read them, you definitely got to let me know. And if you want to share some of this stuff with your students, because a lot of this is where I'm coming from in the classroom, that's a great idea too. So there's a little theme for today's 3 books that I read and loved. They all involve this machine right here, right? It's a CAT scan machine, because all 3 of these books are focused on new discoveries in neuroscience and what the implications that has for teaching smaller students, teens, and for telling and writing stories. So if you could just take in that image, and I'm going to switch the slide. All right, let's absorb Wired for Story first. I just find this to be really interesting. This comes from the chapter, How to Hook a Reader. And I just want to read and show you some of this interesting stuff because you'll be amazed at it. Plus, you can see that it has some implications for teaching too, and how hard it is to maintain attention and how important it is that we concentrate. So let me send you back a little bit so you can see it all. Okay, there you go. All right. In the second it takes you to read this sentence, your senses are showering you with over 11 million pieces of information. Your conscious mind is capable of registering about 40 of them, right? 11 million pieces of information, but our conscious mind can only register 40 of them at a time, right? Crazy. Your conscious mind is capable of registering, and when it comes to actually paying attention, on a good day, you can process 7 bits of data at a time, and on a bad day, 5. On one of those days, more like -3, right? So your brain has to develop what they call zombie systems, and that goes over here. Your subconscious brain, which neuroscientists refer to as adaptive or cognitive unconscious, is a finely tuned instrument, instantly aware of what matters, what doesn't, why, and hopefully what you should do about it. Neuroscientists aptly refer to this as zombie systems, right? Our brains do a lot of things automatically, right? Like I take a breath without thinking, I blink without thinking, I listen without thinking. All these different processes occur that allow us to subordinate stuff that's not, critical, and to foreground stuff that is. So this book by Lisa Kron, Wired for Story, tells you how to write a story so that it perfectly captures our subconscious attention. Because stories, according to this book and according to neuroscientists that are cited in this book, stories exist to help us anticipate the future better. So if we could apply this to maybe some of the learning habits that we have as well, that would be good. But this is a wonderful, fun read, Wired for Story. Let's get to some of the business reads on the next slide. So, I found this to be a nice little takeaway quote from How to Talk So Teens Will Listen and Listen So Teens Will Talk. The majority of this book chronicles a classroom of parents that meets with the Adele Faber and her colleague at one point, and they go over their stories. So it's a very anecdotal book. It's a sequel, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen. I didn't read that one because I teach teens. But I will get to one that applies to both. That's the next book. But this one, let's go ahead and take in this quote. If you like what you see in this quote and if it makes sense to you, it is kind of a nice book. It is available on the Montgomery County website, Overdrive. So if you have a library card, you can have this book on your phone for free and listen to it. That's what I did, free. All right, take a look. The attitude behind your words is as important as the words themselves. So I'm going to read that like a meanie right now. The attitude behind your words is as important as the words themselves. Automatically, when people hear, teens especially, when they hear a tone of voice that is displeasing to them, it could be something like you're giving them rewards even, but it won't make sense. The tone has got to be correct. So the attitude that children thrive on is one that communicates you're basically lovable, capable person. right now there's a problem that needs attention. Once you're aware of it, you'll probably respond responsibly, right? So, though teens can be frustrating or often frustrating, this is a great book for kind of getting in the headspace of how to talk so that they can start to work through it themselves. Now, the next book that I would suggest reading probably first, this is the most important one and has the most useful information, The Whole Brain Child, really supports this. There's a ton of overlap between this book and The Whole Brain Child, and I want to show you a few different pages from The Whole Brain Child because it informs a lot of what I do and should inform a lot of what all parents and teachers do anyway, because it's just how the human brain operates. So let me get to that slide real quick. So, here is the main takeaway word from the book, The Whole Brain Child, is integration, all right? So in Whole Brain Child, it treats the brain sort of like a house, right? But you can see here some of the zombie systems: breathing, fear, blinking, they're all taken down here. Anger is kind of centered here. And here's all the stuff that we worry about at school. Notice that these things here will subordinate this side of the brain, right? Because they are concerned about integrating what they call the upstairs brain to the downstairs brain. When a child, a toddler, or a teen gets upset, this part here is pushed aside. And until you integrate what's being experienced here in this part of the brain, right, the zombie system part of the brain, no progress can be made here. So you can talk to your blue in the face about how your teen should be or your child should be more reasonable, but until you integrate their upstairs and downstairs brain, right, until they get these higher-minded ideas, you won't get anywhere. So it's a really important idea, integration, and arriving at a place where students can fully integrate their emotions with their thinking is the goal of this book. So I wanted to start with that basic idea, right? We are trying to have students not only respond to this part of the brain, but to develop this part, which should be done around the age of 25 when that prefrontal cortex is fully myelinated. Let's go to the next slide real quick. Get in the flow, navigating the waters between chaos and rigidity. This is one of the main takeaways for me too. There's a ton of great stuff in this book, but this is the one that when I read it, I said, I gotta share this with parents. It's perfect. So let's get a little more specific about what it looks like when a person or child is living in a state of integration. When a person is well integrated, he enjoys mental health and well-being, but that's not exactly easy to define. In fact, even though the entire libraries have been written discussing mental illness, mental health is rarely defined. That's called positive psychology. It was actually invented down the road in West Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania. You can get a degree there in positive psychology. It's a very interesting, new field. It's based on the concept of integration and involves an understanding of complex dynamics surrounding relationships in the brain. A simple way to express it, though, is to describe mental health as our ability to remain in a river of well-being. And when you get to the illustrations in this book, boy, oh boy, do they make clear, do they elucidate this idea of integration and how we should operate as teachers and parents. So let's take a look. Imagine a peaceful river running through the countryside. That's your river of well-being. Whenever you're in the water peacefully floating along in your canoe, you feel like you're generally in a good relationship with the world around you. You have a clear understanding of yourself, other people, and your life. You can be flexible and adjust when situations change. You're stable and at peace. Sometimes, though, as you float along, you veer too close to one of the river's two banks. This causes different problems depending on which bank you approach. One bank is chaos, where you feel out of control. Now, what might the opposite of chaos be? Instead of floating in a peaceful river, you're caught up in the pool of tumultuous rapids and confusion and turmoil rule the day. You need to move away from the bank of chaos and get back to the gentle flow of the river. Now here's the best part. This page in particular I really liked. But don't go too far, because the other bank presents its own dangers. It's the bank of rigidity, which is the opposite of chaos. As opposed to being out of control, rigidity is when you're imposing control on everything and everyone around you. You become completely unwilling to adapt, compromise, or negotiate. This rigidity trap is something that I can admit as a teacher I fall into all the time. I think I visit the other bank of chaos too, and I do that as a parent as well. We're always trying to navigate to stay in that proper channel of well-being. All right, let's stick with it. Near the bank of rigidity, the water smells stagnant and reeds and tree branches prevent your canoe from flowing in the river of well-being. So one extreme is chaos, where there's total lack of control. The other extreme is rigidity, where there's too much control, leading to a lack of flexibility and adaptability. We all move back and forth between these two banks as we go through our days, especially as we're trying to survive parenting. When we're closest to the banks of chaos or rigidity, we're farther from mental and emotional health. The longer we can avoid either bank, the more time we spend enjoying the river of well-being. Right? Think of going with the flow, for instance, right? So, much of our lives as adults can be seen as moving along these paths, sometimes in harmony of flow of well-being, but sometimes in chaos and rigidity, or zigzagging back and forth between the two. Harmony emerges from integration. Chaos and rigidity arise when integration is blocked, when students can't talk through things, right? Acknowledging their feelings first, and then getting to their decision-making process second is absolutely a key and crucial insight that is borne out by neurological inquiry, right? When they put people through the CAT scan, right, they discover as they ask them questions or they relive experiences in there, they realize that you cannot go, if you don't integrate your feelings with your decision-making, well then you're just going to be constantly stuck in a non-integrated space, which is a place where you can't learn or grow. All of this applies to our kids as well. They have their own little canoes and they float down their own river of well-being. Many of the challenges we face as parents result from the times when our kids aren't in the flow, when they're either too chaotic or too rigid. All right, and then it goes on to a 3-year-old. I have a 3-year-old at home right now, so they're definitely singing my song. All right, so this has been the first installment of Mr. Surface's book club. We had 3 books, and what tied them all together was neurological inquiry and what it has to do with either stories, what it has to do with the way we process information, with our relationship between emotions and decision-making, right? And of course, that's essential for my room because you have to make a decision at one point to read a book and really concentrate for maybe even a half hour, 40 minutes or something like that at a time. So this is key for teachers and key for parents. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. If you read the books, please reach out to me. I would love to chat with you about them. And please have a happy rest of whenever you're watching this.